So before I start, I just want to let you know that we have detailed videos on all of the stitches used in this project, and we'll put those in a playlist in the top right hand corner here and again at the end of the video. So for my first sunflower, nice easy one, I'm going to draw myself the centre in with this white pencil just to mark where the centre is, and I'm going to use 6 strands of a variegated stranded cotton, and I'm just going to work a straight stitch. So starting my thread in the middle, 2 small stitches, this will get covered up, and I'm just going to come up on the edge of my circle that I've drawn out to where the edge of the petals will be. And that's my first flower petal. So try and keep your stitches so they come away from the circle, perpendicular to it, not so they go at an angle, straight out from the centre. You can make them slightly different lengths. Come quite close together where you come out of the fabric so that the petals all look like they're joined to the centre of the flower. I'm just going to work my way around the circle, just varying those slightly each time. You can come back and fill in any gaps, so don't worry if you have a few gaps in there. So just working around the whole circle with straight stitches. So I've been all the way around to the beginning, I've got a few gaps, so I'm just going to come back and put a few extra petals in. Sunflowers have lots of petals, so it's nice to overlap a few as well. Go around as many times as you like, put in as many petals as you want. And I'll just finish my thread in the centre with a small stitch. Cut my starting knot off. Okay, so straight stitch, it's ready for its centre. So for the centre I'm going to do French knots. I'm using a stranded cotton again, but just 3 strands this time. So I separated them out, pulled out just 3 strands. I start my thread in the same way. I'm going to come up on the edge of my petals, needle away from me, thread over the needle, back underneath, keep that tension on, needle goes back in the fabric, pull that thread tight, that's important, pull the thread through to the back to make your knot. Do that a few more times. So where you want the knot to sit, needle away, thread goes over the top of the needle, round the back, back towards you, keep the tension on, needle goes into the fabric, pull that thread tight, through to the back. Pack these in nice and tightly so you can't see any of the fabric through the knots. So I've been all the way around the outside so I can form the shape of the centre, and then I'm just filling in with knots into the middle. Make sure all of that fabric is covered. So get a couple more in. Easy to slot an extra knot in if you need one. That will do, one more. And then to finish my thread, I can either turn over on the back and just weave it underneath, or I can do my 2 little stitches on top in between the knots, which I'm doing here. Back to the top, cut my thread, cut my starting knots. There we have our first sunflower. So sunflower number 2 is going to be detached chain stitches and colonial knots in the centre. So I've drawn my circle to indicate the centre of my flower. I'm using 3 strands of a stranded cotton this time, just to show you what the different threads and thicknesses look like. So up on the edge of my circle, down next to where I came out, it's going to form a loop. That will determine how long your petal is. So bring your needle up inside the loop, and that will be the end of the petal. And pull that thread to the outside of the circle so the petal forms. Don't pull this too tight or you'll lose your petal shape. And then going to take the needle down on the outside of that loop to finish off the stitch, and that's a detached chain stitch. So come up next to that, thread to the outside of the circle, down next to it, that creates the loop, up inside the loop to form the length of the petal, pull it tight, not too tight, and down the other side of the petal to finish the stitch off. Again, make sure that the petals point away from the centre, line up with the centre, don't do them at a funny angle. Up and down near the same point, doesn't matter if that is the same point. Up inside, pull to the outside of the flower and down on the outside of the loop. So I'm just going to work my way around the circle, doing these detached chain stitches close together as I can at the centre. Make sure the petals stay nice and round. Okay, last few stitches to finish off my petals. With this one is don't pull too tightly on the stitches, so you get these nice petal shapes. Last one, finish my thread off in the centre, and then for the centre of this one we're going to do a stitch very similar to French knots called Colonial knot. So it's like a French knot with an extra step to it. So I'm going to use this Lana thread, 2 strands of it, for the Colonial knots in the centre. This is a wool acrylic blend, and this is in a brown colour. So I started my thread as before in the centre, and for a Colonial knot I'm going to go underneath the thread from left to right, the needle horizontal, and then make a French knot. So over and back, needle goes into the fabric, pull that knot tight around the needle, and pull it, stitch through to the back. Just pull down on the knot, not too tightly. So this makes a bigger knot than a French knot. So if you want a larger knot, rather than wrapping a French knot twice, do a Colonial knot. Underneath, left to right, needle goes horizontal, keep the tension on that thread, then wrap like a French knot. So over the needle, back towards you, needle goes into the fabric. The trick is to pull this tight before you pull the needle through, so you don't get a loop and a knot. So work my way around the edge of the flower, underneath, left to right, wrap like a French knot, needle goes in, pull that knot tight. Down to the last few knots here. Get into a rhythm when you get going, so scoop, turn, French knot, pull that tight, that's the key. We'll get 2 more in there, scoop, turn. One more in that little gap. And then I think I'll turn this frame over and just slide that underneath the stitches on the back. So detached chains and Colonial knots. So I'm going to change technique now, and we're going to do some ribbon work. So I've got some silk ribbon here, threaded it in my needle, and then to keep the ribbon on the needle, just push the needle through the end of the ribbon and pull the other end. That locks it onto the needle. Just going to leave a little tail on top, go underneath to the other side, and then we'll stitch over that part that's underneath the middle there on the back when we do the centre. So I'm going to do, just pull that back a bit, I'm going to do a ribbon stitch, so we go through the middle of the ribbon. So we'll decide how long we want our petals to be. I'm going to make these a bit shorter but make them a bit more puffy, so going through the middle of the ribbon, pull it down slowly, and that forms a nice little point. Don't over pull these or that will disappear. So up on the edge of the circle, ribbon in the direction that you want the petal to sit. I'm going to go right through the middle of it, and if I just push it towards the centre, you can see how it pushes it up and we get nice dimensional petals. Slowly, slowly, nice point. So come up close to the previous one. Through the middle of the ribbon. Work my way around the shape as before. To keep those nice and short, but just push them in a bit to make them stand up. I'm just going to work my way around the whole shape. So last one in that gap there. They look really nice if you just push them towards the centre and they just stand up. Gives it a really nice dimension. If you wanted to go round again and put a few more in, you could. Some of these sunflowers have lots of petals in them, but I'm just going to do one turn so that I can show you the next part. So I'll just finish that off in the centre. Stitch that in on the back. Right, so for the centre I'm going to do French knots like I did for the first sunflower, but in ribbons. I've got a 2mm ribbon now. The petals are 4mm, this is a 2mm, and I'm going to do French knots. So the technique isn't any different from the normal French knots, but it looks a little bit different in the ribbon. And just be careful when you come up next to these petals now that you don't bring the needle through them and squash them down, because they're all standing up very beautifully. So just a reminder for French knots: over the needle, back towards you, keep the tension on, needle goes back into the fabric close to where you came out, pull that tight. Now with this silk ribbon, if you pull it too tightly you'll lose the knot, so just take up the tension and pull it down nice and slowly to get a nice dimensional knot. If the ribbon is very fine, if you pull it too tight you will lose the definition, so just ease off on the tension a little bit for these ones. And again, just working my way around the outside to get the shape. Ribbon towards me, needle away, over it and back, needle in, tighten the tension. Just that little space to fill in now, so I'm just going to try a couple of Colonial knots in the silk, just to make a bit more texture in the centre. So remember, that's a French knot with an extra twist in it, just gives you a slightly bigger knot. So French knot will be up and round, Colonial knot underneath first, and then a French knot over the top. So 2 knots that go really well together. Just give you a bit of extra dimension. So last one, and then on the back I will weave that ribbon underneath the stitches on the back to finish it off and get rid of my starting knots. So there we have a silk ribbon sunflower. I'm going to do a couple of really 3-dimensional sunflowers now. The first one we're going to use just 1 stitch, and that's turkey rug stitch. I'm going to use a Madeira Lana thread. So this is the wool acrylic blend, and I've just doubled it, so I've got 2 strands, and you can see I've drawn 2 circles now. That will become obvious why in a moment. And so I'm going to do the centre in the same stitch as I'm doing the petals with, but you can do 2 very different things with this technique. Right, forget that. Start again. Take 2. So I'm going to do 2 3-dimensional sunflowers now. So the first one is just going to use 1 stitch, and that's turkey rug stitch. Now I'm using a wool and acrylic blend, so that's my Lana thread. I'm using 2 strands of it in the needle, and as you can see I've drawn 2 circles, and that will become apparent why. This is going to be the centre, but we're going to do 2 layers of petals for this. Now turkey rug stitch starts from the top of the fabric. There's no starting knot in stitches, so it starts from the top, and the 2 tail ends are going to be part of the petals. So you just take it down on the outer edge, and I'm going to come up to the left of that. Oops, it's pulled all the way through. That is one of the problems starting that way. Just keep your finger on it. Up to the left. Now down to the right of that little tail end, so we've done a little sort of stitch across the top, and before I pull that tight I'm going to bring the needle back up in the middle where I went down. Just make sure it's this side of that loop, so that when I pull that tight, that loop tightens over the top of the 2 stitches. Now you can just keep going with this. I'm going to work my way around this way, so if you're left-handed you could go that way around. Right-handed, so I'm going to go anti-clockwise. Leave a little space, needle goes down. You see I've got my finger on that loop. This will be the petal, so decide now how long you want that to be. Come up to the left of that, which is the end of the previous stitch. Keep your finger on this loop because otherwise it will pull tight. Down to the right. Before you pull that top loop tight, just bring your needle back through the middle. Make sure it's this side of the loop, then you can pull that tight, and that stitch holds it down. Do a few more. This one's quite complicated, so do check out the video on this one in the playlist that we've made. You can get that at the end of the video with all the other stitches that we've used as well. So up to the left, down to the right, holding that bottom loop down still, and the top loop until I come back in the middle. Let go of the top one, make sure the thread's this side, and that anchors it in place. So working my way around the petal shapes, trying to get these roughly the same, but it's nice to have a bit of variation. The petals aren't all the same, so don't worry if they're not exactly the same, but do keep your finger on it to stop it pulling tight. Back up to the middle before you pull that top one tight. So I'm just going to work all the way around the edge, and then I'm going to put a second row on the inside. I just want to show you how to change thread. So I've run out now and I'm on the top. Your stitch should always finish on the top. So if you just cut that to the length of the petals, and that will just blend in with them. Cut them a little bit shorter. And the end becomes part of the petal, so I can do the same at the beginning. And you've got no finishing off to do other than that. And then to start my next one, so I would finish back up in the middle, so I would be going down here if I was continuing, so I'm going to do that, and there my little end becomes part of that. I'll cut it to length later Then I'm coming up at the end of that previous one, down to the right, keeping my finger on that tail end so it doesn't pull through, back up in the middle, making sure I'm on the outside of that loop, pull the loop tight over the top, and I can just carry on as before. Okay, I reckon I can squeeze one more in that little gap there. Perfectly. Up to the left, down to the right, back up in the middle, pull that loop tight over the top, and then as before I can just cut that. It's secure, it's not going anywhere. Cut it just short of the petals. I'll do the same with that one that we started over there, and they'll just blend in nicely. Now I've got my first row in, but to make it look really three-dimensional I'm going to go around the inside and put another row in exactly the same way. I'll just start that so you can see. And if you're doing more than one row of this stitch, always do the bottom layer first, because if I tried to stitch underneath there now I'd have to fight my way through this lot. So you can flatten that down and we can stitch over the top. Remember, no starting notch. There's my little tail end. Keep my finger on it. Up to the left, down to the right, back up in the middle, pull that top loop tight over the top, finger down to keep it in place, and just working my way around exactly as I did for the first row. So you can put as many rows in as you like, depends how you want your flower to look. So I'm just going to go around one more time and then I'll show you the centre. So I finished my petals. I've done 2 rows of the turkey rug stitch to really give that a nice petal three-dimensional look. And I'm going to do the same stitch now in the middle, so turkey rug again in this brown Lana thread, 2 strands. So I'm going to go round and round and round just like I did before, but then there's one more step that I'm going to show you to make this look really three-dimensional. Now just to help me, because I'm obviously fighting quite a few petals and I want to be able to show you what I'm doing, made myself a little template, just cut a hole in the middle so I can squash those down and I can stitch around there without getting caught up with my yellow ones underneath. So you don't need to do this if you don't want to. You might find it helps you. So I'm going to stitch around and round and round and fill in that centre in the same stitch, and then I'll show you what happens next. So starting on the top as I did before. Now you can make these ones a little bit shorter now. We're not making big petals with this. So we can just make tiny loops now. And that will save us some thread as well. It does use quite a lot of thread, this technique, so just little tiny loops now. Don't worry about the length of them if they're not the same, that doesn't matter. So round and round until we've filled in the whole shape. So when I take the card away, this is what we end up with. It all looks a little bit of a mess at the moment, but don't worry. So I've done all the way to the centre with that, and you can see there's lots of ends. You can start and stop this stitch as you need to, it's fine, because we're going to leave the loops of the petals, but we're going to cut the loops of the brown. So very, very carefully, just pull out what you don't need out of the way, get the scissors underneath one loop and give it a sharp snip. So do each loop separately so you don't risk cutting anything you don't want to. And cut all of the loops through. And if you just pull the scissors vertically upwards, you know you're in the middle of the loop. So I should just go around and do those. Don't cut the yellow ones. And you can just get your needle, just check we've got everything. We have. And then we're just going to trim the brown ones nice and short. Now just do this slowly if you've never done it before. You can put these stitches back in if you should cut too many away. The easiest way is I'm just pushing my finger up from underneath and it pushes it up, and I can just trim all those brown ones nice and short. Don't worry about that mess, I'll get rid of that in a minute. Make sure you don't get the yellows. So just a little bit at a time. And you can choose how short you want to go. You can go quite short with this. Just seem fluffing it up with the scissors just to see what's still standing a little bit proud. Make sure you've got some nice fine sharp scissors. I should just fiddle with that a little bit longer and get that where I want it to be. Okay, so I've cut them nice and short, and this is why it's called turkey rug stitch, because it looks like the knots of a Turkish rug. So there's a little pile on it there, and there's just a few fluffy ends, so just get yourself a little bit of tape, lift those off just to clean it up, and you see that makes a really lovely three-dimensional sunflower. Okay, so for the last sunflower we're going to do woven picots. This is what they look like. And there's a finished one. You can see how that stands away from the work. These are done, but I've left the pins in, and this is the pin we're going to work around, so you can see all the stages. I'm going to use a perle cotton. This is a number 5. It's twisted already, doesn't strand, so it'd be easier to weave through because I haven't got lots of strands to deal with. Started my thread off, so the pin is placed in the fabric to the length of the petal, so it goes in where you want the end of the petal to be, and it comes up on the edge of the circle. We're going to weave around that. So I started my thread. I'm just going to come up one side of the pin, leaving a little bit of a gap, go around the top of the pin, down the other side the same distance away. You can see my petal forming already, back up in the middle to make the third spoke. I'm going to come to the left side of this pin here, just because I'm on the right side at the bottom. Come to the left there, and that makes 3 equal spacings. Quite tight around the top of the pin, and then just weave underneath these. So I'm going to go under the first one, over the middle one, and under that one there. Just push the needle to the top to make sure that the weaving stays nice and tight, and then just back and forth, over and under, and over and under. So we came under this one, so we now go over, under the middle one. Make sure we do go under it. Go. So this doesn't go through the fabric, it all wraps around these spokes, nothing through to the back of the fabric. If it's just getting caught up, it was there, you can just turn the needle around and use the eye, and then it won't get caught. So under that one, over the middle one, and under. So we're just weaving back and forth. All the way to the very bottom of the petal. You can use a needle just to pull the weaving up tight. You can just go under one at a time if you want to, over the middle one and under that one. Just make sure you always alternate, else it won't be weaving. Just going to go all the way to the bottom. Finish off, go as far as you can go, right up to the circle so there's no gaps. Try and finish in the middle, so I'm just going to go under that one side there, and then take your needle down through to the back. Got enough thread in this one to do another one, so I've got my 4 there, and I'm going to do another one in between each one. So I will just put the pin in between, like so, and then I can just bring my needle up again and start the next one. I really want to join the petals up, so I've done that one right next to that first one. We'll go around the top of the pin and down at the end of that one, and then all the petals will join up. Back up in the middle, just come to the left side, so I'll just go around the right side of the pin and then off we go again. Weaving over and under. So I'll finish all of these petals off and then we'll look at the middle. So finished all my picots, these ones are done, so I'll just take the pins out here. You can see how wonderful they look. You can just curl them up and give them some real form and some shape. And the sunflowers I think look nicest if they've got a bit of shape in the middle. Okay, so to finish this one off, I'm going to put some seed beads in the middle of this. So I've got some here. I'm going to put on, these are glass beads, brown. I'm going to use a double length of sew-all cotton. So this is just a normal sewing thread. I've doubled it over. I'm just going to run it through the beeswax. You can use proper beading thread if you want to, or normal sewn cotton through the beeswax works well. Make sure that you use a fine needle that will go through the eye of the beads that you're using, so do just check that first. And I'm just going to fill in the centre of my sunflower with the beads. It will give it some really nice texture, so really three-dimensional. As before though, I'm going to go around the edge, so this is just a little bit neater rather than starting in the middle. Thread on one of my beads just to the bottom and down the other side of the bead, straight down with the needle. Now this is going to happen, so they're going to get caught around the petal, so you might want to leave your pins in. I wanted to show you what they look like, so I've taken them out, so just something to be aware of. And I'm just going to do them in different directions so they don't look quite so uniform. Hold the thread up, that will work better. So just thread the bead on, slide it to the bottom, take the needle straight down into the fabric at the other end of the bead so it's nice and secure, and just fill in that whole area with the beads. Just down to the last few now. The double thread is just a little bit stronger for the bees because you don't want them falling off, so it just adds a bit of extra strength, but they go on really beautifully, and that's worked out quite well. Then I'll get one more in that space. Might just have to fiddle it a little bit to make sure that happens. Perfect. And then I've got room there just to finish that off with a couple of stitches. Make sure this is really secure because you don't want the beads falling off. I'll go for another one just to be on the safe side. You can finish on the back if you want to, back to the top. And then I just want to sculpt these a little bit so you can see what the effect is. Because they're quite thick, they will hold their shape once you move them. There we go, so there's the final one. So let's have a look and see what they all look like together. So there we go, lots of different techniques, lots of different stitches, different kinds of threads and beads and ribbons in there. So I hope this has really inspired you to have a go at your own sunflowers. So I hope you liked this video. Do give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more great content. There's a playlist here of all the techniques that we've used in this video in much more detail, and don't forget to check out the shop too. So thanks for watching.